Senator Day.
Thank you, Mr President. My question is to the Minister for Indigenous Affairs. Minister, whilst I am encouraged by news out of my home state yesterday that in order to open up job opportunities, penalty rates have been reduced, this will not, however, benefit people elsewhere in Australia, particularly those in remote regions. And on this point, Minister, I note that an Aboriginal person, for example, living in a remote region can hunt kangaroos, turtles and dugongs, enlist in the armed forces, get married, have children, buy a house, vote, but they can't take a job under terms and conditions which they decide are best for them. Minister, the social costs of unemployment amongst Aboriginal people, poor health, depression, substance abuse, crime, domestic violence, teenage pregnancy, even suicide are so horrendous. Why are they not permitted to make up their own minds about getting a job?
The Minister for Indigenous Affairs, Senator Scullion.
Thank you, Mr President. I thank Senator Day for the question. I'd like to also acknowledge his 40-odd years in working in remote Indigenous communities. First of all, there should be no distinction between the wages and conditions available to our First Australians and any other worker in Australia. So, for those issues in South Australia, should those be changes in the hospitality industry within Adelaide, they certainly should be available in other areas like the APY lands. I understand these are processes at a state level, but hopefully if those matters are good for them in one state, they should be good for individuals in another. The focus of this government in terms of Indigenous employment in remote areas is to ensure that we seize every single opportunity to transition people into training and ultimately real sustainable employment. That, of course, was the whole focus of the Forest Report, creating parity. We've got a strong, coordinated employment strategy to ensure that Indigenous people are able to take up job opportunities. So from 1st of July this year, major reforms to remote employment services in remote communities will end passive welfare and give people a pathway to real jobs. 29 vocational and training centres are going to end training for training's sake. The employment parity initiatives to help big employers get into employment parity of 3%, which I announced last week, will create 20,000 jobs. By 2020, 3% of new government contracts will be afforded to Indigenous businesses. And by 2018, 3% of the Commonwealth public service employees will be Indigenous. We've made a good start, Senator, through you, Mr President. Since September 2013, 23,100 Indigenous Australians have been insisted into employment under our new job programs.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Day, a supplementary question.
Thank you. Minister, rather than shuffling young Aboriginal people through the job services industry, that, in the words of Noel Pearson, subjects them to bureaucratic straitjackets and red tape that kills innovation and social entrepreneurship, why doesn't the government consider trialling community-based exemptions to let young Aboriginal people negotiate employment opportunities which suit them?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr President. I again thank the Senator for the question. Look, any ideas, Mr President, including yours, Senator Day, deserves consideration on the basis that it gets support from the community. This government has made it clear that getting Indigenous adults into work is one of our highest priorities in improving the lives of our First Australians. That's why we've reformed remote employment services. Again, from the 1st of July this year, job seekers in remote communities will be able to participate in continuous work-like activity and meaningful work experience. And Senator, I assure you, it won't be people standing around with shovels or painting rocks. It will be genuine activities that equip people to take on real jobs that, as Marshall Langdon just said in The Australian, do exist in remote communities, or where they choose to move to take up employment opportunities. These reforms will include $25 million invested each year to build local businesses which will underpin the local economy, create jobs and offer opportunities to job seekers to get practical work experience.
Senator Day, a final supplementary question.
Mr President, in the last census, Aboriginal unemployment is over 20%. Warren Mundine has said allowing people to languish on welfare and dismissing them as being unable to work is not treating them with dignity. When will the government restore their dignity and allow them to enter the workforce under terms and conditions which suit them?
Minister.
The government believes that everyone who can work should work. If jobs aren't available, then people need the opportunity to undertake meaningful activity that builds their skills and contributes to their community in the longer term. That's why we've reformed remote employment services. Employment gives people financial independence, control over their lives and the ability to provide for their family's future. Combined, our Indigenous employment initiatives have the potential to change the face of our workforce and our country, to create vibrant, thriving Indigenous businesses that ensure that our workforce reflects the strong diversity and strength of our nation. It is just everyone's task to ensure that we close the employment gap between Indigenous Australians and the rest of our country once and for all.
Thank you, Minister.